As you know, I've been thinking about how we approach mental health at work, especially as a mom of twins, juggling podcasting, working, and life in general. And recently, I know I've shared this with you, I hit a wall balancing all of it. And it's really helped me to think about mental wealth. And this shift in mindset really got me to explore some new tools to support my mental wealth. And Magic Mind, as you know, I've been working with them, and they reached out recently and asked me to drink the mental performance shot for 7 days straight to experience the benefits. And that was easy to say yes to because I drink it every day. But let me tell you that I think I've shared this before. It has totally changed my morning routines. I mean, I literally reach for the mental performance shot before I even get my first cup of coffee made. It's not only something that I've found has provided me with the ability to feel really alert and focused, but because it has a little bit of caffeine, less caffeine than coffee, fine, it really gives me like a boost to start my day before I've kind of started my day. And what I love too about it is that it's 1,000% safe, and it's vegan, and it's also kosher certified, and so all of that means a lot to me. But plus, it's not a quick fix. I really like this idea that instead of relying on quick fixes, Magic Mind believes that mental performance is tackled in the long term. And if you've listened to me for the last 4 years, you know that this is something that I think is really important. And their caffeine that they do have is time release. So rather than it, um, you know, kind of giving you that immediate boost that some like energy drinks might do for you, it's not like that. It's not this charge up type of drink or supplement. It's an enhancement for a brilliant today, as they put it, and an even better tomorrow, which I love. So if you're like me and you want to invest in your mental wealth, Magic Mind is offering a 48% off discount on your first subscription, or 20% off a one-time purchase with code HUMANHR20 at checkout. All you have to do is go to magicmind.com/humanhr and use code HUMANHR20. That's magicmind.com/humanhr with code HUMANHR20 for 48% off your first subscription or 20% off your one-time purchases. Get to your mental wealth today, folks. I know I'm into it. Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Traci Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe, because if you're not subscribed, what are you doing? Thank you so much for being here. As you know, if you've been a listener of my podcast for a while, you will already know that relationships are something that I would say are really, really important to me. And actually, they've been extremely critical to the success of my own career and my business as well. So I'm really excited to welcome Brad Englert to the podcast. And let me tell you a little bit about Brad before we let Brad do all of the talking. He is an author, advisor, and technologist with over 40 years of experience in the private and public sectors. Accenture for 22 years, including 10 years as a partner, and then at the University of Texas at Austin for 8 years, including 7 years as the Chief Information Officer. His recent book, Spheres of Influence: How to Create and Nurture Authentic Business Relationships, offers a practical guide to help emerging and established leaders develop and perfect the critical hard skill of building effective and lasting professional relationships, which is why I am so enthused for our discussion today, because it is literally the most critical, if you ask me, the most critical part of what can make or break someone's experience and success. So welcome, Brad.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh my gosh, of course. And the listeners won't know this, but we have tried a few times already to record, but between like basically an Arctic blast in the south and various challenges on my end, we are finally getting to record, which is really nice. Sometimes the long-awaited recording makes it all the more fun. But as I kind of mentioned at the top of our session here, relationships I find to be really important. And so I'd love to hear from you, given that relationships are also really important to you. What kind of inspiration or influence did you have that led to you writing Spheres of Influence?
Well, I was very fortunate over many years to have really good mentors. And at the firm, from day one, they taught you that the people you're working with, your clients, your peers, someday may be your boss, maybe hiring you to do something, and or maybe peers. And the person who started with me 40 years ago became the chief information officer of a large state agency the same year I became the chief information officer at the university.
Mm.
And so it just came true. And as a executive in the firm, or at all levels, you not only had a mentor, but you had mentees. And it was just built into the culture that training and mentorship was a core value. And, when I got to the university, I tried to uh, help the organization create those same skills, not hide in the ivory tower, but get out and meet with customers, meet with their peers. And, I mentored 2 or 3 people. I still do that, but I didn't feel that would scale. And so I wanted to capture all these stories and so I could share it with a wider audience. And that was really the genesis for writing the book.
That's amazing. I think when I think about like my takeaways from Spheres of Influence, what really stood out to me was obviously the spheres, that there are these internal and external spheres, of
Mm-hmm.
course. I mean, there's a visual there for a reason, but also some of those core principles, especially when we think of, like, I have some notes here: goals and aspirations of others,
Mm-hmm.
managing expectations
Yep.
clearly, caring about the success of
Mm-hmm.
others. Like, these are things that maybe for some it's like, okay, yeah, fundamental, got it. But
Mm-hmm.
actually, it's really important to make note of it, because so many of these things are not happening day to day. And I'm curious, were these core principles that, were certainly felt throughout the book, were they something that you learned through your own experiences, or were they things that you felt you lacked from leaders or lacked from peers, or was it just kind of, going through the motions of your experiences and your takeaways?
Well, let's talk about the internal sphere. So, first is your boss. And I learned that you can't wait for your boss to help guide you. Sometimes you just have to ask, what are their goals and aspirations? And it's okay to ask. In fact, when I was the boss, I welcomed a discussion with my direct reports of, what are your goals? How can I help you?
Mm.
And setting expectations, I was bad at that in the beginning of my career. I got much better later. And and then third, genuinely caring. When I got to the university, I met with this professor who I had known 15 years prior, crusty 40-year professor. And I said, give me some advice. He goes, get out of the office and tell people you give a damn. And that was the best advice, because you're not going to build relationships hiding behind a screen in your office.
It's so true. And I remember when you and I first spoke, that last point you made in terms of the advice that you received, as far as like, just get out there, like get out from
Mm-hmm.
behind the desk and like talk to the people
Mm-hmm.
with whom you need to talk to. It really made me reflect on my own experience, especially back in my retail days, because when whenever I was in retail, there were always these roles like leader on duty, manager on duty, right? And especially being in HR, you kind of have those roles in retail. And then you also, if you're working in a store like I was for many years, you also have to be a manager on duty, just like
Mm-hmm.
any other sales or department manager.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I was really passionate about was being on the floor
Mm-hmm.
with the team, because
Absolutely.
that, as an HR person, like, that's where you build the relationships. That's where you get all of your information.
That's
It's
right.
where you have the most fun. It's also
Yep.
where you find out things that you might need to find out in order to solve some problems also. So I think
Absolutely.
that advice is so well stated, and it's kind of evergreen. Like, it doesn't matter
Mm-hmm.
what industry you're in, what
Right.
job you have, it really just it's agnostic to all of that.
That's right. I learned long ago to go to people's offices to meet with them. So I would not have them come to me and, come to the ivory tower. So all my direct reports at the university, I would go to their office. Well, why would I do that? One, I get to walk across campus and get the energy of the campus. Two, I bump into
Nice.
customers and I bump into my peers. Three, their team sees me coming to their boss every week, like clockwork, trying to help their boss be successful. So it's showing the flag, showing the support. And, same thing with your customers and your peers. One of my
Mm-hmm.
peers at the university was in charge of public safety. Well, it wouldn't if something would go wrong, it's when it would go wrong. And over my 8 years, we had a bomb scare, we had a shooting, we had a murder.
Mm.
So we had 100,000 people in the football stadium every Saturday in the fall. But I would meet with my peer every month, and we would talk about what's going well, what's coming up, what could we do better, and then once a year we get our teams together and we practice. What happens if there's an ice storm? What happens if there's a hurricane? What happens if the power goes out? Lo and behold, a year later, the power went out. and
Of
we
course.
we generate our own power and backup by the city, but they both went out. But
Wow.
we were prepared. And the bomb scare, I was out on the mall with my phone. Well, all my computer and everything in the office, but we had a standard operating procedure. We all got on a conference bridge, and that's connected to the executive leaders. And so we basically managed the whole issue out in the mall with my phone.
Mm. Oh my gosh. It's like a poem for 2025 almost. It's like, everything is done by the phone. Everything that we have the capability of doing is in our hands. I mean, it's amazing. Obviously we don't ever want to deal with things like that, but my takeaway from your story is that preparation is not only
Mm-hmm.
key, but actually to be frank, my first reaction was like, man, Brad's probably an amazing peer. Like that was actually what was going through my head when you were saying that, because, there are times where we work with folks who aren't so collaborative or aren't,
Mm-hmm.
really focused on just working as a team and working together and getting, moving the needle together. And
Right.
it's the coworkers or the peers who do that and who care about that or care about the success of others,
Mm-hmm.
who are like the best people to work with. I'm sure
Well,
everyone is thinking about someone or just really wishing that they could work with you. One or the other or both.
well, I asked my direct reports to also meet with their peers across campus. So, you know, eh, so 7 direct reports. We all had about 10 peer relationships, and every week we would get together and talk about, well, what did you hear? How any
Mhm.
rumors out there? And you don't hear rumors if you're in your office, So
That's
I had
true.
a
You don't
I
know
had
what
a
the streets are saying.
so I had a rumor from my public safety guy. He said, I heard a rumor that you don't have enough diesel in the generators at the data center. And I said, that's a darn good rumor. I'll go check. It turned out the generators run on natural gas. So
Oh my
it
gosh.
was a great rumor, though. But he was able to snuff it out immediately.
Right.
And
Yeah.
we would help each other that way. My direct reports would go meet with their peers, and it was like a nervous system. You get feedback, two-way communication. I had a woman who worked for me who reminded me when she read the manuscript of the time I forced her to go meet with the IT director in a department. And she said, I thought you were crazy. They hate us. And I said, well, better to be in the tent than outside the tent throwing rocks at us. And I would meet with her, the department chair. So there were reasons they hated us. There was some bad behavior before I came in, and they had a litany of things that went wrong. So we just apologized, said, we'll not do that again. And she, over 9 months, every month met with this other woman. And as we got better and more predictable, guess what? That person became an advocate for us. And when she became an advocate, her boss became an advocate. So it went
Totally.
from hating us to being an advocate. But she thought I was crazy.
No, it actually makes me think of some of my own experiences, but sometimes I think leaders think that that process of changing someone's perception can be a very long process, but actually it doesn't have to be, because once you
Hmm.
say you're going to do something and then you actually do it
Right.
and you do it again and you do it again and you do it again
Build
and you
trust.
just keep doing it. Yeah. And you have the consistency of following through on what you've said you're set
Hmm.
out to do, people then trust you.
Yeah.
And that establishment of trust is obviously a core tenet in relationships, and
Hmm.
you touch on that throughout your book also. And
Hmm.
kind of coming back to this internal sphere of influence, you mentioned already relationship with the boss, relationships with other executive leaders, and then also with direct reports. And a big part of that, especially the relationship with direct reports, that I at least took away was this importance on fostering trust and transparency.
Right.
And so when I think about shifting perceptions, I was just speaking with someone about how leaders, whether they want to acknowledge it or not, can and do make or break people's experiences in their
Sure.
careers. If someone has an amazing leader when they first start out, that's something that sets them, I mean, they are so lucky. That sets them apart from a lot of people from their first experiences in work. And for the rest of their career, they think about that person. On the
So the
contrary, if someone has
yeah.
a leader that maybe doesn't have their best interest in mind, or any of
Hmm.
these core principles that we've already kind of talked about, similarly, that stays with people. I'm sure
Hmm.
you've also spoken with people who are like, I had a terrible leader and it's like 20 years ago they told me, and they just
Hmm.
don't, it's not that they don't get over it, it's that it had such an impact on them. And so when I think about, again, like, trust and transparency, leaders really need to think about the impact and the influence that they have, and they have to acknowledge that they are not the same as everyone else. They have this role now where they're leading people, and they have to assume that responsibility and treat it with care, I
Well,
think.
and you need to walk the walk. So, in IT world, you could work 24 hours a day. I mean, there's no end to it. But we established um, norms and values for the organization. And then I would not respond to emails after business hours. I would go on vacation. I would do training. I would make sure they did training, make sure they did their emails. If someone
Mm-hmm.
skipped orientation, we'd find them and get them into orientation. It's like no exception. But one
Right.
of our values was family first. Well, why did we do that? Well, I live in Austin, Texas. A lot of high tech here. All the big tech firms are here. I cannot compete on salary, but what I can compete on is you work an 8 hour day and then go home, see the family. So I had this network engineer, and he was got a big offer from a startup and a lot of money, equity, blah blah blah. They would feed him, do his dry cleaning, and I said, "Look, I don't say this for everybody, but if you don't like it, you can come back." And literally 2 weeks later, he
Mm-hmm.
calls and he goes, "This place is a zoo. They feed me and do my dry cleaning because I never go home. I
Mm-hmm.
took the job to help my family, but I don't see my family anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Can I come back?" It's like, of course you can. And he's still there 15 years later.
Wow. Wow. It's when you started to say that they were promising food and dry cleaning, I already knew where you're going with that, because, companies always hopefully offer really great benefits, but companies that are offering benefits like that are probably really trying to ensure that people feel like working there is worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Like they have,
Mm-hmm.
company, and it's not to say that it's bad. Like working in a zoo, literal or figuratively, is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just
Right.
like where it kind of depends on where someone is in their lives. Like if someone has a family, that's probably not going to really be a match for them. Whereas if someone is like, just trying to get as much experience under their belt, maybe they're single, maybe they're not, maybe they really don't mind not being home a lot. I mean, it kind
Mm-hmm.
of depends.
Right.
But those things, I think, play a big role. And it's interesting because I think that as we grow in our careers and we gain additional experience and wisdom, if you will, these are things that we become aware of as we grow and as our lives do change, or we go through different milestones or
Mm-hmm.
life changes. But I think it's a testament to your leadership actually that he wanted to that he did come back.
Yeah,
Not just that he wanted to come back, but that he actually did. That
and
can be
felt
very difficult, I'm
felt
sure.
safe asking.
Yeah.
He was comfortable asking. On the setting expectations, I had a situation with a customer where large university, they had a big program that they wanted me to lead, and it was in October. And I said to the provost and CFO, I'd love to help you guys. However, in the summer, I have a long awaited vacation to Australia, and I
Mm.
was supposed to go last year, but work canceled. So we have the passports for the family, we have the tickets. So I need to go for 3 weeks in June. And they're like, oh, okay, no problem. And we got to April, made a big milestone achievement. So yay. Uh, Things were going clickety clack. And then in May, we're meeting with the president, which we meet every month. And the president, I said, I just want to remind you, as I have the last 3 months, that in June I'll be going to Australia. And his hand started shaking. And I'm in slow motion canceling the vacation. Whoa. And the CFO and provost said, Brad, wait a minute. Hold on. Mr. President, when Brad joined us in October, we agreed that we would let him go on this vacation. Diane's in charge when he's gone. He says this is a good time to go. We should uphold our commitment.
Wow.
Customer supporting my vacation? Awesome. And 10 years later, I'm having dinner with his wife and my wife, and we talked about that story. And he goes, "While you were gone, we were scared to death." But they
That's
upheld their
amazing.
commitment.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, commitment is a big deal. And
Mm-hmm.
this is the same kind of thing that underpins how you change perception and how you actually change cultures is
Mm-hmm.
through mutual commitment, mutual ownership. And I love that. I love that you were like, oh crap, I'm not going to Australia. My wife is going to hate me. Like, what am I going to do now? Because I know that I've been there. I know other listeners have been there where you're like, I talked about it already.
Right,
They said I could go. Their reaction is concerning. I'm going to have to cancel. I'm
right.
really annoyed. My partner's going to be annoyed. And for you to be able to just, woosah and be able to get the relief that, they made this commitment to you. They trust that you've managed your, quote unquote business well
Mm-hmm.
enough to be able to rely on your team
Yeah,
and others who continue to, keep the ball rolling. And for what it's worth, I think also leaders who maybe because there are certainly leaders who break those commitments or,
mm,
are so deeply afraid when someone does go on vacation that
yeah.
even if it comes from a good place because they value that person's effort so much, it really does a disservice to the person who's going on vacation or needs to go on a leave or whatever it is. And,
Well,
I
I
just think
got
about
better. I
how
got better at it later in my
when
career.
yeah, exactly. It's like we have to set a standard that people need to prioritize their time as
Mm-hmm.
well. And at the end of the day, like, has a company ever stopped or an organization ever stopped running when someone goes on
Of course
vacation?
not. Of course not.
Right? Like, never.
Yeah.
Literally never.
Well,
I
I had two phrases I used through the book, which is one is use your words. So if you want something, you need to
gotta say
tell
it.
people that. And
Hmm.
the other was people are not mind readers. So if you're a boss, you can't read people's mind. If they don't tell you, you don't know. So
Totally.
you need to. So just the setting and managing expectation, very simple. But if you don't do it, then you'll be wrapped around the axle the whole time. I had a
Yeah.
boss who was a type A boss. Everything was urgent, urgent. And I was trying to leave one evening to have dinner with my wife, and the phone rings literally at 5 o'clock. Pick it up. It's the boss, the partner, and she's a type A personality. I need a white paper. A white paper. I literally said, "Whoa." I didn't say no because no would set her off like a rocket. I just said, "Whoa." And I said, "Well, when do you need this white paper?" Let me check my calendar. I need it in 2 weeks. Sounded like overnight,
Yeah, right.
How many pages should this white paper be? Oh, 3 pages. I was thinking 10. Do you have an example of a white paper that I could use? Yeah, yeah, ask David. I did it on XYZ Corporation 10 years ago. Well, guess what? I went home. Now,
As you should.
before I learned to say whoa, I would have stayed up all night. Oh, canceled dinner. Stayed up all night. Delivered a 10-page paper, and she'd yell at me.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
instead, I got some mental space and time just to really clearly understand. So the next day, I gave it to one of my staff persons, and they said, "You have 10 days to work on this," and we delivered it early.
That's amazing. It's a great story. And when I think about that, it's like you, I can only imagine, actually, I can imagine the emotional impact if you were to do all of that work without really understanding the clear expectations.
Yeah.
Because in this situation, you're also managing up, which is a very important skill
Mm-hmm.
for those listening. The better you can manage up, the much happier you'll be, I think, in your careers. But it's
Yeah.
it's a hard skill, of course. But not only are you managing up, but the emotional impact, that was the potential emotional impact, I should say, in the event that you did deliver a 10-page paper overnight and you
Mm-hmm.
canceled dinner, right? Just for it to then not be what that person wants or needs.
Right.
At that point, you're so dissatisfied because you're like, I
Mm-hmm.
spent all of my time, I canceled all these things. And while that type of commitment also is great in work, to really have a drive to achieve and deliver on standards and expectations, what I love that you shared is that you took a moment, you didn't say no, you said whoa, and you took a moment to really ask questions. And
Mm-hmm.
this is the same, it goes both ways, because this is the same thing that I try to, as a call to action to leaders, try to ask them all the time. Like, rather than jumping to assumptions or conclusions, seek
Right.
to understand, how do we ask questions before coming to conclusions on things. And so with projects, when you're the recipient of
Mm-hmm.
something to work on, it's kind of the same thing, where asking clarifying questions can save you a lot of time and
So
headache.
I had a direct report who reminded me that I would often slow her down. She was zipping to the conclusion before she actually understood what the problem was. And I would, and it drove her a little crazy. It's like, let's, there's no rush. Took us 40 years to get this way. Another day doesn't matter.
Right.
And, by just slowing down and really understanding what the issues are, sometimes you don't have to do anything. It works itself out.
Mm-hmm.
But she said she appreciated that I pulled her back from just running straight into the fire.
Right. I was going to say, it sounds like me. Was I your direct report that you were talking to? Because my boss recently, we talked about how fast I move. And
Mm-hmm.
so this is something, like, even when I was reading, the spheres of influence, I was really learning a lot about myself. And even
Mm-hmm.
as I've just talked about before, that, asking questions before jumping to conclusions,
Right.
even with the best intentions, like someone like me who is type A and very
Mm-hmm.
fast in momentum and movement and getting things done, it's like, when you ask questions, you can still move fast, but you can move fast in a much more effective
Right.
and much more accurate
You
way.
don't want to be an unguided missile.
No, that's definitely true
So
in
I had
so
a
many
I
ways.
had
Um,
a guy who
and
he
yeah, go
shared
ahead.
a story with me. He goes, I was working for this company, and all of a sudden, my boss started kind of boxing me out of meetings and not listening to me. And, after about 3 weeks, I got some time on the calendar and I said, "Did I do something wrong?" And
Mm,
the boss just looked up and said, "Oh, I have trouble at home. I didn't realize it was affecting me."
wow.
And he said, "Did I do the right thing?" I said, "Yes, you had the courage to ask. You didn't
Yeah.
quit. You didn't suffer. You know, you had the
Yeah.
courage to actually ask." And he said it improved dramatically right after that.
I'm sure. I'm sure. And for that manager too, it like creates a bit of a safe space for them. And there's like mutual vulnerability
Yeah.
because the person who's like, this is happening and I don't really love it, is
Hmm.
obviously managing up there, but is also being vulnerable to your point and courageous in
Yep.
addressing something that they weren't really happy about. And
Hmm.
this does, I think, play a pretty significant role in the external spheres of influence, which we haven't
Hmm.
talked about much just yet, a little bit, but that's
Yeah.
customer relationships and peer and vendor relationships.
Yep.
And that, I think, sometimes, at least from what I've seen, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Sometimes I think that those relationships are harder in some ways because you don't necessarily feel that you can create space. Maybe it's a little bit harder to be courageous because you're afraid of the professional pressure, maybe, if
Hmm.
especially in a maybe a sales environment where a customer's satisfaction actually has a huge financial influence, and
Hmm.
that is the case in probably any industry. But what are your thoughts on that and how people can prioritize their customers' needs and
Mm.
deliver on those expectations while also maintaining their values and their, courageousness in their own right?
So the key word you used was prioritize. Not all customers are equal. And you need to step back periodically and say, who are my best customers and how can I help them be more successful? Accenture, 80 to 90% of the customers are repeat customers. Well, why is that? Because they were successful in the past and they want to be successful. But I had some customers who didn't really want a partnership and they had kind of let's extract stuff from the vendor. In fact, it was like a kabuki theater. Every week, she would ask me for free stuff, and I said, "Stop asking me for free stuff. I don't do free stuff. I'd be happy to do a change order." and at the end, because her management wanted her to do that. I mean, she didn't really
Mm.
want to do it, but management said, "Go get free stuff out of our vendors." And at the end of the project, I said, "I'm never working for you again." And she goes, "I don't blame you."
She's like, I wouldn't either.
uh, and we had a good laugh over that. And then I had on the vendor side, not all your vendors are equal. We spent tens of millions of dollars at the university. Well, who are your most important vendors? Just look at where you're spending and then build those relationships. So,
Mm.
network, computer, learning management system. So, in a university, you rely on a learning management system. We had an old, buggy learning management system that the vendor only showed up once a year to get the check, the maintenance check, which was 10% more than the prior year. They just didn't care.
Of course.
They took it for granted because they thought the switching costs would be too much. 54,000 students, 4,000 faculty, 21,000 staff. Yeah, it is hard to switch. But
Yeah.
the students hated the product. It was clunky and slow. Faculty didn't like it. So we went out to the market, looked at all the learning management systems, picked a modern, new, more secure learning management system, unanimously endorsed by the faculty and staff committee. And it took us 2 years, but we transitioned to that new platform, which has been in place now for 10 years. And I was so happy to say sayonara to that vendor who just didn't care.
Yeah, that's probably what's the word I'm thinking of? Like extremely gratifying,
Yeah, it took two
and
years.
cathartic maybe. Yeah.
Well, and the vice president for sales of the company would reach out to me periodically and ask me how it's going. I mean,
Mm.
that's customer care.
That's customer care.
And some things were so big that they had to change the product to work in our size institution. Well, they made those changes and went on to sell it to a lot of other research one universities. So it was mutually beneficial.
Right. Amazing. I love that. And I love the term customer care rather than customer service
Mm-hmm.
because service is so transactional. Customer
Yep.
care is more about the relationship. I love that. And you're right about the prioritizing. And when I think about like HR leaders. We often, at least I am familiar with this phrasing, we talk about internal and external customer.
Yep.
So the internal customer are all of the employees, and the external customer are the people or customers who our internal customers are affecting or impacting or working with.
Yep.
And when I think about our role as HR leaders, or really any business leader for that matter, I do think that there is a customer care initiative there. Like if we are not answering someone's questions in a timely manner, or we're not approachable, or we're not really solving problems or interested in solving problems, or just all of those stigmas that we hear about HR leaders, if we're doing any of that stuff, we're not really fulfilling the needs of our internal customer. So I love something that I really love about your book, Spheres of Influence, is that these concepts can really be applied regardless of where someone works within an organization, and also regardless of what industry they're in.
And internal as well as external customers. It's, understanding goals and aspirations, setting and managing expectations, and genuinely caring applies to all those relationships.
Absolutely. And with that, I have taken up a significant amount of your time. And I think that you and I both could probably talk about relationships and the importance of these really strong, trusting, and mutually supportive relationships probably for another 40 minutes. But in the interest of time, I would love for you to maybe share with the listeners where they can connect with you, where they can read Spheres of Influence, and where they can maybe learn more about how they can influence their own environments and their own experiences.
I'm going to send you a customized link that will, when they click on it, will take them to a free sample of the book. It will also have a second tab to find how to buy the book. There's ebook, audiobook. And then third, how to schedule time on my calendar. So I will send that right after this.
Amazing. And we'll make sure that that link, is in the show notes so that everyone can very easily just click and not have to worry about a thing. We make it nice and simple over here. But Brad, thank you so much. And thank you for writing a book that I think really does a very good job talking about the impact and the necessity of having these types of relationships and the focus on these types of relationships. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.